Warning, 50 States, 50 Murders is a podcast based around true crime. Please be advised of the horrific details of murder, abuse, and sexual assault, occasional adult language, as well as brief humor. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Hello, and welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders. I am your host, AJ. This is the podcast taking you, the listener, on an auditory road trip across all 50 states while we discuss 50 different murders. Thank you all for tuning in to Season 2, Episode 26. This week, we are heading to the state of Hawaii. We'll be discussing palm trees, paradise, and murder. Once again, welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders. A big thank you to everyone who's tuning in for this week's episode. Again, I am your host, AJ, and unfortunately for me and you as a listener, my co-host, Sarah, as you can tell, is not here. It's a murder podcast, so I think that it would add a little spice if I were to say that she's nowhere to be found. I haven't heard from her in quite some time, kind of keep you on the edge of your seat. But that's actually not the case. Unfortunately, our co-host just simply isn't feeling very well. So thoughts and prayers, good vibes, all that good juju out to our co-host, Sarah. Hope you get better, and hope you make it back for next week. Unfortunately for you, the listener, you're going to be stuck listening to this full episode of just me ripping this solo. And I'm going to do my best to make this entertaining as possible. And try to carry a conversation with myself for about an hour. So, yeah, buckle up, enjoy the ride, and here we go. So, when researching and recording and putting these episodes together, you know, I have a few goals in my mind that I like to try to accomplish. I hope that you as a listener obviously can find entertainment in this show. That's first and foremost. If you didn't find it entertaining, I'd have to imagine you wouldn't be listening right now. And secondly, I try to find some information that maybe might help you learn something. I mean, I know when I research, every week I learn something new, something I didn't know prior to looking it up or seeing, and I think that's always kind of cool to learn something new, so I hope that you might feel the same way. Hopefully you get a laugh or two while still covering a darker topic such as murder. I try to throw in some hidden humor. Some of you get it, some of you don't, and that's okay if you don't, but I appreciate the ones who do catch it. And, you know, what I really like to do is find discussion points, some key talking points. You know, we've really had some good ones these last few weeks, you know, whether it's mental illness, gun control, you know, just some of these topics that may not have a right or wrong answer. It's just interesting to dive deeper into those thoughts and kind of get other people's feedbacks. So with that being said, researching this week's case, I really had two questions that I highlighted for this week, and I was going to throw these questions out to my co-host Sarah for her to kind of just generically answer off top. And then I wanted to circle the horns, re-ask the question, and kind of get a deeper take after the story that we're going to tell today. So I guess I'll throw these out there. I'll kind of give my own personal take. And I want you, the listener at home, to kind of think about the question just in your own head. I mean, kind of take it for what it is, see what you think. And as we dive into this story this week, I'm just curious to see if maybe your answer changes a tad or if it still stays the same. So, my first question that I came up with when researching this is there a limit for how hard you can push for justice of a loved one? Do you feel like it's possible that maybe you could push too hard for justice? So, open-ended question, obviously, but in a hypothetical world, we don't want anything to ever happen to a loved one. But hypothetically, if something were to happen to a loved one, I'm just curious, what is the limit that you would go to for justice? Is it any and everything? Off top, for me, myself, I like to think that no matter the situation, if someone does something wrong to my loved ones, I like to think, yes, I would go to hell and back for justice. Whatever that may be, I'm going to do that. So initially, I guess my answer personally would be no, I don't think there is a limit for justice. And I'm not necessarily sure you can push too hard for justice. But again, I want to circle back to that as we wrap up and kind of see if there's any change in opinions. And my second question that I had this week, are there any certain wrongs that are just simply impossible to make right, no matter the compensation? So, in this world, unfortunately, it's an unfair world. Things happen. And for those of you who are lucky enough, maybe something bad happens and you get a little compensation on the side. Hey, maybe you're walking down your local grocery store, you slip and fall, maybe you get a couple extra bucks in your pocket. That's a pretty cool compensation, and I'd say that that's a right that could be made wrong. Obviously, there's levels to this. Are there certain wrongs that are simply impossible to make right no matter the compensation? I would tend to say, yes, I'm sure in the grand scheme of things, there has to be some wrongs in this world that no matter the compensation, it just simply cannot be made right. And in this specific case, we will talk about a wrong that is attempted to be righted. Currently, as we speak, actually, it's in motion. And I'm just curious to know, does that make it right? Have they come close to touching the surface? Or is it just something that no matter what you get thrown your way, there's no right to this wrong? All right, so this week's recommendation comes from my buddy Nate. And for those who do not know Nate is a person who played a really big role for me getting into podcasts personally. Nate and my friend Tone, they were host and co-host of the Luck Changers podcast, which, by the way, rumors are, I heard Luck Changers may be making a return after a long break. So I want to say, me personally, I appreciate Nate for supporting our show here at 50 States, 50 Murders. I appreciate Nate asking me to be a part of his show years ago and really getting me into this hobby. It's allowed me to learn how the whole process works, branch off and do my own little projects such as this one, and throw some stuff out there that hopefully you as a listener finds entertaining, like I said. So thanks, Nate, for recommending the state of Hawaii. We will be traveling to Hawaii to learn a little bit more about the island, some places to do, some things to see when venturing out that way, as well as some infamous Hawaiian murderers. And then, of course, we're going to dive into our own murder case of the week. The state nickname is the Aloha State. And Sarah did a little bit of research for us, so I appreciate you, Sarah. We've been on a roll lately with these illegal laws, unusual, unique laws. I kind of like those. I get a kick out of them, so hopefully you like those too. Here's a few that we have. It's illegal to annoy birds in Honolulu public parks. So I know a few weeks back we had that it was legal to hunt a bear, but it was illegal to wake a bear up. In Hawaii, it's illegal to annoy a bird. Don't look at them the wrong way. Don't talk to them. Just leave them be. And also in Hawaii, it is illegal to place coins in your ears. If you're someone who enjoys placing coins in your ears for whatever reason, you probably would not enjoy going to Hawaii. That is a no-no. Sarah makes mention here that she wanted to discuss her coworker's family being in Hawaii. She mentioned that there are very odd business hours that just kind of works for the people there who live there. And also, her coworker brought home the best chocolate she's ever had. So, I would not take Hawaii as necessarily like a chocolate capital, but she said that was the best chocolate she ever had. I personally have never been to Hawaii. Someday, I would like to see it, of course. Obviously, it's recognized as the most beautiful state in America. It's paradise. It's probably the top honeymoon destination for those of us who can afford that kind of trip. I would like to go see it. I will be honest, it's not necessarily my top state. I mean, I've mentioned a few states back. Alaska is really my number one bucket list state. But, I mean, I think just in general, Hawaii's got to be just top 5 out of respect, given the paradise that it is, the views, the scenes. So, I'd put it up there, but not my own personal experience. I will say that my dad, he served in the Navy when he was much younger, and he was fortunate enough to be stationed in Hawaii. And he said that he did enjoy the islands very much. He said that it was as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than what you hear about. Sometimes word of mouth, it just doesn't do a place justice. And it's kind of the idea I got from listening to my dad talk about Hawaii. A lot of different stories and, a lot of positives, but he was pretty adamant about how the natives, they strongly disliked people who are not born and raised in the Hawaii Islands. So if you come over there as an outsider, let's say, it may take some time to be accepted and welcomed in. It's from the jump. It's not necessarily a huge welcome with open arms. So take that for what it is when you're going over there. Be respectful. Unfortunately, Hawaii is one of the top states for homelessness. And a lot of that is due to an overabundance of people moving to Hawaii that aren't necessarily from there. And it's kind of causing those who have lived there their whole lives to be priced out. And, I mean, that's a whole other topic of conversation that we're not going to get into. But take that for what it is. Depending on where you go when you're in Hawaii, you might not always be favored. So there's that. We got the Hawaii state flag, which we'll throw up on the TikTok as always. Not a huge fan of this one, I'm going to be honest. It just reminds me of England's flag too much. So it's kind of lacking in originality. Not a huge fan. Murder per capita. Hawaii comes in at 46 out of all 50 states for murder per capita. That's 2.1 murders per 100,000 people. I'll be honest, this one was a little bit tricky, looking for murder cases, infamous murderers. As far as infamous murderers go, I could only find 3, which I will discuss about here shortly. But as far as murder goes, yeah, relatively safer, 46 out of 50. Top places to see in Hawaii. I'm going to keep this relatively short because, again, it's Hawaii. Anywhere you are in the state, I mean, you're going to be looking at a beautiful location. You got beaches surrounded by the ocean. You got forests, jungles, mountains, waterfalls. I mean, again, I think it's safe to say it's recognized as the number 1 most beautiful state in America. So you can't go wrong when you go to Hawaii. I got 3 places that I thought would be interesting to me personally. If you are a 90s kid, or younger, honestly, if you're familiar with Jurassic Park, Obviously, a really huge movie back in the 90s. The island where Jurassic Park was filmed at was in Hawaii. And I saw that you could take helicopter tours and kind of fly over the entire island. And just looking at pictures, I mean, it just, again, me on the mic, I can't really do these pictures justice. You got mountains, waterfalls, a lot of scenery that would be familiar if you've watched the movie several times. So I think a helicopter trip through Jurassic Park would definitely be at the top of my list personally. If you are a history buff, there is the Pearl Harbor National Memorial in Hawaii. Obviously, Pearl Harbor itself, that's the location in Hawaii where we were attacked. And they have like a memorial, U.S. Navy operated boat rides. You can hear stories, see ships. It just looks like a pretty cool spot to learn some history. And I know we have some history buffs who like to listen, so Pearl Harbor National Memorial would be a nice little spot to check out. And I would say lastly for me on my list, we have Diamond Head State Monument. And it's a park, lots of trails, lots of hiking, scenery. I mean, there's not a lot more you can ask for. I think if you're someone who's into outdoors, hiking, nature, I'm trying to give you a little bit of everything. So you got history, you got pop culture with the Jurassic Park, and then with this one at Diamond Head State Monument, you're getting some outdoorsy trails, hiking. So we'll kind of check everything off the list if you're ever in Hawaii. Those are the 3 places that I would do my best to check out. That's a little bit about the state of Hawaii. As always, we like to flip over and cover some infamous murderers who wreaked havoc in the state that we're covering before we jump to our own case. Again, Hawaii was a little bit tricky. I really could only find 3 serial killers documented. And the first one, probably the most notorious, is the Honolulu Strangler. And a shout out to Corey, one of our listeners. He actually recommended looking into the Honolulu Strangler. So I know that when we were in school, our teachers told us not to ever use Wikipedia because it's not legit. But I got to be honest, I want to use Wikipedia as a source. I pulled these 3 serial killers right from Wikipedia, verbatim. So I do apologize, but this is what we got. So the Honolulu Strangler, also known as the Honolulu Rapist, is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who was believed to have killed 5 women in Hawaii from 1985 and 1986. He is the second known serial killer active in the state. Police arrested Howard Gay on May 9th as the primary suspect. The suspect's ex-wife and girlfriend described him as a smooth talker. They also provided a potentially incriminating fetish clue, as both recalled engaging in bondage activity, allowing him to tie them up and have sex with their hands bound behind their back. His girlfriend related that on nights after they had fought, he would leave the house, and that these were the same nights the murders had occurred. The suspect lived in Iwa Beach and worked as a mechanic at one of the air freight carriers along Lagoon Drive. Between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m., the suspect was interrogated, failed a polygraph test, but was then eventually released. Police followed the suspect, and a $25,000 reward for information was put out by private businesses. 2 months after the arrest of the suspect, a woman came forward and claimed she saw a man with an unnamed victim on the night of her murder. She successfully picked Gay out of a photo lineup as the man. She did not want to be a witness because she believed he saw her as well. Howard Gay died in 2003. Next up, we have Eugene Barrett, an American serial killer who murdered 3 women he was romantically involved with in Honolulu, Hawaii, from 1959 to 1995. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the final murder and died in prison in 2003. He was the first confirmed and one of only 3 known serial killers active in the state. After his sentencing, Barrett was transferred to an out-of-state facility in Oklahoma, where he spent the majority of his prison sentence. He was occasionally contacted by his son's wife, who sent him photos of his grandsons, as his son resented him too much to do it himself. In 2003, Barrett was returned to Hawaii and lodged in the Halawa Correctional Facility, but fell ill and was transferred to the Mami Medical Center, where he died from an undisclosed illness on November 8th. Lastly, we have the Kauai serial killer. The Kauai serial killer is an unidentified serial killer and rapist who murdered 2 women and injured another on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, between April and August of 2000. Despite a composite sketch of the perpetrator and the availability of his DNA, he was never caught and the murders remained unsolved. The prime suspect in this case was Waldorf Roy The prime suspect in this case is Waldorf Roy Wilson, a Hawaiian sex offender. He was convicted of a rape and kidnapping in 1983. Wilson was paroled on January 9th, 1999, and moved to Kauai. On September 12, 2000, Wilson was arrested again for violating his parole. After he was arrested, Channel 8 News broadcasted that Wilson had been arrested for parole violations after being questioned about the murders. This led to Wilson suing the Kauai County Police Department and the Honolulu Magazine for defamation, but this lawsuit was later dismissed in 2009. Waldorf Wilson's DNA was tested against the DNA of the perpetrator, and the result was inconclusive. He was never charged with the murders. So that's our state of the week, Hawaii, in a nutshell. Just a quick little in and out, things to do, places to see, some interesting laws, as well as some infamous murderers who wreaked havoc in the state of Hawaii. As always, we have our own personal murder case of the week. And just to give myself a little pat on the back here, I feel like our last few episodes have honestly been, our last few cases have really been intriguing. I've really enjoyed researching into them and kind of seeing where the story takes us. And this week, it's a little bit different than most cases because maybe our victim isn't the number one maybe our victim's not necessarily the number one. Okay, because maybe this one's a little bit different because our murder victim isn't necessarily our main character, our point of subject. Obviously, they are key in the story, but as you see, we'll discuss why that's a little different. Okay. This week, we will be jumping back to the year that I myself was born, and that's 1991. Sarah, and that's 1991. This week, I will be discussing the murder of Dana Ireland, a murder that took place on the island of Hawaii. Dana's murder was one of, if not the most highly publicized murders in the state of Hawaii. We are going to dive into the Ireland family's unrelentless push for justice, as well as the authorities' handling of this murder case. Lastly, the aftermath of Miss Justice 33 years later. Dana Ireland was a 23-year-old who was from the mainland United States. She was born and raised in Fairfax County, Virginia. Born December 12, 1968, she was the youngest child of parents John and Mary Louise Ireland. Dana was with her parents visiting Hawaii for the holidays. It was Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1991, as well as her 23rd birthday just a couple weeks back. Spending time with her family for the holidays in paradise, there is obviously a lot to be excited about. Unfortunately, this birthday/Christmas vacation celebration would quickly become a nightmare, not only for the Ireland family, but for everyone who was involved. On December 24th, Dana hopped on her sister's bicycle and went riding around the area. Jumping on the bicycle that Christmas Eve day would be the last time that her family would ever see Dana alive. Jumping on the bicycle that Christmas Eve day would be the last time her family would ever see Dana alive. Later that same evening, her bicycle was discovered on the side of a road. The bicycle was mangled, the frame destroyed, the seat came completely off, and the tire rims were completely bent. It was apparent the bicycle had been in an accident of some sort. Next to the bike, a lump of hair, as well as a single shoe. Oddly enough, there was no body or persons on site. I think coming across a bike that was hit by a car, you'd assume that if no one was present, then whoever hit them must have rushed them to get help. Unfortunately for Dana, that was not quite the case. Somehow Dana's body was located. However, she was located... Scratch that. Somehow, Dana's body was located an entire 5 miles away from where her bike was found. As you would expect from someone in an accident, she had visible injuries to her head and body. Now, when you were growing up and you were learning how to ride a bike, I would assume that you, like myself, had a couple scrapes, couple tumbles. We've all been there, scraped knees. You know, I've had a few injuries from riding my bike as a kid, thankfully nothing serious. Now, I've never been hit by an automobile on my bike, but I can say in my time with smaller bicycle accidents, something that's never happened is my clothes falling off. That would be pretty weird, right? So the cuts, the bruises, and abrasions to her head and body, those are something that you would expect from a bicycle accident. What was really strange about this specific accident was that Dana was naked from her waist down. Not to mention the fact that her body was 5 miles from the site. It was easy to conclude this was something more than just an accident or a hit and run. Now, to help better set the scene, where Dana was found is best described as a remote, isolated location. A jungle along the coastline of the island. And again, this was 1991. So again, this is prior to cell phones, prior to just immediate on-site assistance. Now, there was a nurse who lived in the area of where Dana was found. Her name was Nurse Jerry Gallagher. A friend took Jerry to Dana, and along with her, she brought her first aid kit, and she did everything she could to treat the wounds with bandages. Obviously, in your house, there's probably not a whole lot that you have that could help someone in dire need, such as Dana. Jerry tried getting any information she could out of Dana as far as who hurt her, who did this, what happened, the whole nine. Dana was incoherent. She was floating in and out of consciousness, and unfortunately was unable to give any answers to any of Jerry's questions. Now, given the remote jungle location that Dana was in, take into the fact the lack of the phones, the emergency departments in the area were spread really thin. So from the time that Dana was found until the time that an ambulance arrived, more than 2 hours had passed. So you can see how that's an issue. Granted, when you're in a low-populated area, maybe resources aren't as heavily available as other places are. I mean, there's not really a ton that you can do. However, there is documentation that shows that there were certainly some issues internally on the rescue side of things that really helped add to the delay in the rescue. Now, there is news reports documented that said, quote, "From there, almost everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. According to news accounts and official reports released at the time, the 911 system was not fully implemented and was overloaded with calls that evening. Public safety dispatchers didn't know the area and gave confusing directions as to where the rescue workers should go. Initially, police were called, but not an ambulance. The island had too few well-equipped ambulances available nearby. Ireland arrived at the Hilo hospital almost 2 hours after she was found. Some of these facts only came to light because media organizations sued in 1992 to get access to information after county officials initiated a news blackout." Okay, so we can see how, sure, you might not have necessarily a suitable amount of rescue equipment, but they certainly also didn't do any favors for getting this situation handled as quickly as possible. Now, around the same time that Dana arrived to the Hilo hospital, her parents were looking for her. She had not returned home from her bike ride, and then on the news, they were made aware of a young woman located badly injured after an apparent accident. So I'm sure you could assume someone who went out, hasn't been home yet, and then hearing about an accident, your first natural assumption is that it would be your daughter. And unfortunately, that was the case. So they went to the location where the bike was found and instantly recognized it as the same bike that Dana took. Her father instructed his family to go to the hospital. He would stay at the location. He wanted them to go there to be available. By the time the ambulance arrived, her mother and sister were already there. So that kind of just gives you a better idea of how long this entire rescue process took. Once at the hospital, doctors did all they could to help Dana. She held on and fought for over 4 hours, but sadly, at 12:25 Christmas Day, Dana had passed away from the injuries suffered. Cause of death was determined to be blood loss caused by an automobile accident. Now, quick timeout, not to make light of the situation whatsoever, but it's unfair not to just make mention of this. I have to imagine, let's just put me in the position. If I was ever to be murdered, I just can't imagine a worse day in the calendar year to be murdered or to lose life than on Christmas Day. Because I just can't help but think that moving forward in the future, it's Christmas, but this is the day AJ, lost his life. And it's like, and I'm just going to feel terrible in the afterlife. Like, I selfishly took Christmas from my loved ones. So, not that anyone chooses the date on which they're going to pass or the day they're going to be murdered, but I just have to say it's hard to ignore the fact that Christmas Day has to be the worst day for something like this to happen. Nonetheless, back to our story. Christmas Day, after 4 hours of fighting in the hospital due to blood loss, Dana Ireland was pronounced dead. The next odd turn in all of this, there was never really any mention of her being naked below the waist. There were bruises to her inner thighs. Her family believed this wasn't just simply an accident or a hit and run. They believed someone intentionally hit her and then took advantage of her sexually. The local police department initially informed her father that was not the case and that the family was just listening to too many rumors. Don't spend too much time around the grapevine. That's not what happened at all. You're just listening to too many rumors. Okay, so this is where the Ireland family's journey for justice begins. They were absolutely bound and determined to figure out who was responsible for their daughter Dana's murder and to make sure they paid the full price for their actions. This would not be an easy journey by any means, nor would it be swift. Finding suspects and sitting through trials would be a process that would not take days, weeks, or even months, but years. Again, taking another quick little time out here, I feel as if, someone who's not specifically a parent, I wanted to throw this out to Sarah because I know she's a mom, but if you're listening to this and you're a parent, I'm sure you can imagine being in a position like this. Again, when it comes to justice, you're going to fight tooth and nail, no matter what the cost, to make sure that whoever was responsible was held responsible. So I think going back to that original initial question, that's kind of where it kicks in. Is there a limit to where you push too hard for justice? Anyways, carrying on. At the crime scene, the police found a t-shirt that belonged to the perpetrator at the crime scene. Along with the shirt, also booked into evidence, was a sheet that Dana was lying on when taken to the hospital. On the sheet was seminal fluid, as well as a bite mark on Dana's body. Next to Dana's body was a tire track that was assumed to have belonged to the vehicle who ran Dana down. Now you have a t-shirt, a bite mark, seminal fluid. You would have to imagine the police should be able to collect a solid amount of DNA from all of this to better pinpoint who is responsible. Normally that would be true, at least in today's world, absolutely. However, this being 1991, we just weren't necessarily where we needed to be back then as we are now. As far as it comes to scientific DNA data, detectives reached out to those. Okay, hold on. Where it is today. The next step was for detectives to reach out to those who either lived near the accident or where the body was found in hopes of finding a witness who would be able to help them paint a better picture of this accident. Now, the roads that stretched between the 5 miles of the bike and the body were underdeveloped and unpaved. Again, keep in mind, as mentioned, this is like a isolated remote jungle area. So not necessarily a lot of traffic going back and forth on this road. So as you can imagine, there were no witnesses who saw the accident that could provide any assistance in the matter. Thus, with DNA not being as scientifically developed as it is now, as well as no witnesses, this case was currently at a dead end. The Ireland family wasn't necessarily convinced that absolutely no one seen anything or that no one had any other information. Perhaps someone had more to tell that could help, but they were just too afraid to speak up. Or honestly, maybe they just didn't want to. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, natives didn't always take kindly to outsiders. So they kind of had a sense that maybe this was one of those things where the people who were in the area just necessarily didn't want to help. Now, a reward was organized by the Ireland family for anyone who could provide information that would lead to the murderer. The amount that was offered continued to grow over time. Year by year, month by month, year by year, this amount would go up. But no matter the amount of money offered, this led to 0 tips. Frustrations continued growing by the day, and the insatiable need for justice only became more and more for the Ireland family. Now, as an outsider looking in, just as someone who researched this case, I don't think it's unfair to say that justice absolutely consumed the Ireland family. I also think being in their shoes, again, I have no doubt I would feel the absolute same. With these frustrations came less and less belief in the police department. The family at first was supportive of police, and they believed in them to make this right. However, as time progressed, this was where their attitudes really started to shift. And to go back to the mention of the reward that was offered, the family believed that locals just simply refused to help. Someone knew something, but just did not want to speak up. Thus, this led to what they believed as the local police department as, quote, dragging their feet. As the case itself got quieter, the Irellands grew louder. I'm going to redo this whole paragraph. Now, at the very beginning, the Ireland family, they were really supportive of the police team, and they had full trust in them to make this situation right. However, as time progressed, this was honestly where their attitudes changed. I already kind of dove into this, but to go back to the mention of the reward that was offered, the family just honestly believed that the locals simply refused to help. Someone knew something, but they just did not want to speak up. Thus, this led to what they believed as the local police department as, quote, dragging their feet. As the case itself got quieter, the Irellands grew louder. There was not an interview Dana's parents would turn down. Any and every opportunity they could get to put pressure on the detectives and the police force, they took it. They did not shy away from their disappointments in their efforts, as well as their concerns regarding their failures in bringing those responsible to justice. When the interviews didn't quite seem to light a fire, her parents wrote in a letter to the editor at the Hawaii Tribune-Herald, July 1992. In this article, they accused residents of the island for remaining silent due to a bond with the murderer. The family would continue using this avenue several different times, writing into the Hawaii Tribune-Herald. John pointed fingers at the prosecution team, accusing them of foot dragging. I was reading into this, and it kind of took me back a little bit. It reminded me of how Sarah mentioned one of her favorite movies is Law Abiding Citizen. And in that movie, if you're familiar, they took a lesser plea to avoid a possible loss in court. Now, the father in the movie, he didn't care about the risk of a loss. He just wanted to fully pursue the max punishment for what they did to his family. And this accusation, it kind of reminds me of that. So basically, John was saying that the prosecution team, rather than just trying who he felt was responsible, they were too afraid of taking a loss in court. Thus, they just were really taking their time with this and, as he said, foot dragging. And that also led to the prosecution team personally writing back into the Hawaii Tribune-Herald themselves to kind of counter that, just to really, hey, they wanted to defend themselves, explain that that's not the case at all. It said they were simply following the standard of proof before taking the next steps. So we're still kind of getting into this whole thing, but first and foremost, you can understand, surely, this family lost their daughter, and they just want justice to be served. Absolutely. On the flip side, if you were to put your feet into, if you were able to put yourself into someone who lived in the area, they're pointing fingers at you, saying that maybe you're covering up for the murder because of a bond you have. They're pointing fingers at your local police team, saying they're not doing enough. Now they're pointing fingers at the prosecution team. They're getting media involved. They're trying to cause a firestorm in which to really get them to jump. And I mean, certainly I can agree with that. I get where they're coming from, but as an outsider looking in, I think it's easy to see how the Ireland family really could have rubbed some people the wrong way. Moving forward, in both 1994 and 1996, 2 different times, John and Mary Louise moved to Puna, Hawaii, the location where this incident took place. They stayed here for some time to continue putting on pressure for justice, no matter the cost. This time, they were going around with petitions and signatures. They also filed a wrongful death suit due to the injuries as well as the delays in rescue. Now, they were awarded $452,000, but I think more importantly than the money for them was that this suit was just another opportunity to keep their daughter's murder relevant, keep it at the top of news media coverage, and just continue to put pressure on those who were trying to bring those to justice. Again, so I think we're at a point now where we can definitely see how this pursuit of justice, no matter the cost, no matter the finger pointing, it could definitely cause some enemies. And it could also basically stronghold the detectives to just, look, let's just put a bow and ribbon on this case sooner than later. Let's just get this off of our plates and give this family what they want. I could see that being a normal attitude. In 1997, they were nearing the then statutes of limitation in the kidnapping and sexual charge. And in 1997, they were nearing the then statutes of limitations in the kidnapping and sexual assault charges that were soon closing in. I made mention of a back and forth conversation that I wanted to have here, but I guess I'll have to have this conversation amongst myself. In regards to statutes of limitations, I wanted to get Sarah's take on this because, I always like getting other people's opinions, and I thought statutes of limitations is a really interesting concept. When I was younger, I guess I didn't grasp the idea. How could a crime expire, basically? It just didn't make sense to me. You should be able to be responsible no matter how much time has passed. Now, as an adult, I can kind of see both ends of the spectrum. I get that, I feel like I can hardly remember what I had for dinner yesterday. So for witnesses, for those involved, to have to recall something that happened multiple years prior, I can definitely understand how that can cause some issues. Not saying I agree with statutes of limitations, but I am saying I can understand them. I guess that's what I should say. So that's kind of my take on the whole statutes of limitations. Nonetheless, that's what the Ireland family was dealing with here. The shot clock is ticking, and something needs to happen quick. So with the heat of the Ireland family, the continued coverage, as well as the scrutiny of local media, the race was on to find perpetrators and to hold them responsible for the murder of Dana Ireland. Now, we're going to jump back a little bit here. We're going to rewind in our timeline, so follow me along here. We're going to jump back to 1994. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about John Gonzalez. John was a man in the area who was involved in a higher profile case regarding illegal substances. He was dabbling in the cocaine, and he was facing a very long time in prison. But interesting enough, he was let off with a much lighter sentence. Now, why is any of this relevant to our murder case today? Well, the reason he was given a slap on the wrist was because he told detectives that his half-brother, whose name is Frank Pauline, had information that would be helpful in the Dana Ireland case. So Frank Pauline comes forward and informed detectives that both brothers, Albert and Sean Switzer, were involved in the attack and murder of Dana Ireland. Now, the Paulines and So Frank Pauline comes forward, and he informs detectives that both brothers, Albert and Sean Schweitzer, they were involved in the attack and murder of Dana Ireland. The Paulines and the Schweitzers were neighbors in the same area of the crime scene. Frank claimed to have been present with the brothers when they ran her over. He said that they threw her in the trunk and took her away. This deemed all three men, Frank and brothers Albert and Sean Schweitzer, prime suspects for today's case. With all the continued pressure and the limitations expiring, we're going to jump back to where we left off. All three men were found guilty of Dana's murder and sentenced to prison. Understandably, years down the road, justice finally being served, John and Mary could breathe a sigh of relief that those who murdered their daughter had finally been caught, tried, and found guilty, set to spend the rest of their time behind bars. While a verdict does not bring your lost one back, I have to imagine that it surely brings some sort of peace, knowing that whoever hurt the one you loved is no longer out and about living life as a free human or able to hurt someone else, and now they're going to be paying the ultimate price with the loss of freedom. So initially, this is where our stories usually close, right? You have a story of murder, the process of figuring out who did it, the sentencing, and your close. However, for this specific case, it's a little bit different than others, like I said. The closing of this murder case is not going to be the close of today's case. The closing of this murder case will not be the closing of today's episode. Frank Pauline, we're going to jump back to Frank Pauline. He gave his own personal testimony to police, putting himself with the brothers at the scene of the crime December 24th. He went into detail about how all three were riding along, saw Dana, they ran her over. He said that he personally hit her with a tire iron in the back of the head. They stuffed her in the trunk, and they sexually assaulted her at a different location. He swore to this testimony, and then he signed the confession, confirming that all was true. He was not under the influence of any drugs, nor was he pressured into giving this admission. He confirmed that he gave this on his own free will. Now, there are some issues about this testimony. Police had suspicion that he was potentially lying about the information that he was providing to them. When they took him to the island, Frank was really unable to pinpoint any exact locations of either the bicycle accident or where her body was. Also, the Schweitzer brothers had alibis, as they claimed to have been with their family on Christmas Eve 1991. However, I think the thought process at the time, at least for me, would be, why would anyone lie about murdering someone? You know, the details are a little bit sketchy, and maybe he can't find the exact location, but I mean, no one genuinely has a reason to lie about something so major. So I would have to assume that the police are thinking the same thing. Frank claimed to have been the one who specifically hit Dana with a tire iron. Committing a murder is not something that you just casually lie about. Going back to Frank's half-brother, John Gonzalez, who was looking at a long prison sentence in 94, convinced his brother to have information regarding the Ireland case to get his sentencing down. He told Frank that the worst that could happen to him was lying about a confession. And going back to Frank's half-brother, John, who was looking at a long prison sentence in 1994, he convinced his brother Frank to have information regarding the Ireland case, this way to get his sentencing down. He told Frank that the worst thing that could happen to him about lying of a confession is a perjury charge. Well, when perjury was not the charge he was looking at, and in fact Frank was looking at a murder, his attitude changed quickly. He admitted that he lied and that he nor the Schweitzer brothers had anything to do with this crime. Frank may have had a change of heart, but his half-brother John stuck to the script. He goes into court and testifies, absolutely, that his brother Frank, along with the Schweitzer brothers, did in fact kill Dana. One more thing to add, there was a statement that was received from a prisoner named Michael Ortiz. Michael was an accomplice to John. He also happened to share a cell with the Schweitzers when they were in jail. Now, Michael Ortiz goes to the authorities and lets them know that while sharing a cell with Albert Schweitzer, Albert just so happened to confess to him in the privacy of their cell that he did in fact murder Dana. DNA was taken from the three, and police had it on record that the DNA from the suspects and the DNA from the crime scene did not match. Now, this was simply waved off, and the explanation to this is that there must have been someone else also involved. There were no traces of DNA in the car that was said to have been involved in the hit and run. Unfortunately for the Schweitzer brothers, Frank Pauling's testimony that he later stated he falsified, the testimony of John, who was using this as a way out of time served, and then the testimony of Michael Ortiz, who was already a prisoner and just happened to come forward days before the statute's limitation expired. Well, all of these confessions were enough to still put them away. When you add on the mounted pressure that the Irelands persistently added each and every day to lock away their daughter's killers, whoever they may be, unfortunately, it just happened to be a recipe for misjustice. Now, from my own personal take, it sounded like no one was necessarily 100% convinced that these three had done it. But it just seemed like they were happy to put an end to all the years, all the heat and criticisms that they were facing from the Ireland family, from the national media, from locals. They just wanted to get this off their plate. And with this guilty verdict, that's exactly what they were able to do. Now, to be frank, it's hard to feel bad for Frank. Sure, he was trying to help his half-brother out. Yes, we can all relate to wanting to help out your family. I mean, who hasn't helped another family member when it comes time to moving out of their house to a different location, moving out of their apartment into their home? We've all had to carry a bed or a nightstand, yes. But at the same time, stepping up and confessing to a murder to help a brother get out of a cocaine charge, I have a hard time wrapping my brain around that. That is a really big ask. I kind of feel like it reminds me of Meatloaf. You know, I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. That's crazy. I'm not confessing to murder just to get your sentencing down. Sorry, I love you, but I can't do that. So, sure, Frank was trying to help out a family member. I get that, but if you're dumb enough to fess up to something as serious as a murder charge that you never committed, I almost feel like maybe you are right where you belong. Now, something else that was really baffling. Albert went to the trial first. He was offered a plea deal, but of course he said no. Now, keep in mind, he didn't do this. He had nothing to do with it. He was with his family on Christmas Eve, celebrating the holidays. Why would I take a plea deal for something I didn't do? Frank might admit to doing something he didn't do, but I'm not Frank. I'm not taking that deal. I get that. Unfortunately for him, regardless, he decided he wanted to fight this in court, and he was still found guilty. So he was still found guilty. And up next was his brother Sean. This is where it changes a little bit in the sense that Sean also offered plea deal. Now, the family got together. They discussed it with Albert, who was the first brother who actually did get sentenced. They discussed it with Sean, and the family decided rather than going to trial, let's just accept the plea deal. The family quoted as saying, there's no point in having lost two children for a crime that neither committed. So I think that they were going to bat and saying, hey, let's just say that you did it, get the slap on the wrist, and then that way, instead of losing both our kids in prison, we're only going to lose one. And again, Albert, who went first, was all on board for this. Sean felt terrible. He did not want to agree to the plea. He felt like he was doing Albert wrong. But with his family and Albert's support, that's what they did. Now, there were terms to this plea agreement. For one, obviously, he must confess to the crime. For two, he must admit that his brother Albert did in fact participate in the crime. So it's like, hey, we need you to throw your brother under the bus just to absolutely confirm that we are putting the correct people away. We're not locking up innocent people. And then three, he must pass a lie detector confirming that he was telling the truth. When he admits to these crimes, the lie detector has to confirm that that is the case. Fair enough. So, as much as he didn't want to do it, again, with the encouragement of his family, he proceeded to accept the plea deal. Sean admitted to the crime. He said that his brother was there. But here's the kicker. During the lie detector test, he actually failed when claiming he killed Dana. His admission to guilt actually came back as a lie. Now, you would think that this would take the plea deal off the table. You would think that surely there has to be a second look. However, the prosecution lied to the judge about the test results. They informed the judge that the test results were conclusive. He was telling the truth. The judge was not notified of any lies on the detector, and the deal was allowed to go through. Now, it's impossible not to feel sorry for the Schweitzer brothers in this case. Two kids who were 16 and 20 at the time of when Dana was murdered, Christmas Eve, 1991. There was no evidence or proof that they had committed these crimes. You had Frank Pauline, who had a criminal past. You had John Gonzalez, who was already facing a long sentence. And you had Michael Ortiz, the prisoner that shared a cell with the brothers, who all lied in some form about their involvement. The prosecution team and jury all seemed to be at peace, allowing these two to be the scapegoats, all from the words of three guys who were far from what you would call law-abiding citizens. See what I did there? Bring that back. This led to a lot of mistrust from the locals within the police detectives. This led to a lot of mistrust from the community towards the police detectives as well as the justice system in the area. It also stirred back up a lot of unpleasant feelings towards the Ireland family. It was believed that if they had just not put so much pressure on the case, that perhaps justice would have just played itself out properly. Now, again, it's hard to put yourself in that position. I think I would have to imagine that Ireland's necessarily didn't mean no harm to any innocents in this scenario. I don't think it's wrong to fight with everything you have for justice of your loved ones. But on the flip side, even though it's not necessarily their fault per se, you have a community of people who feel like because of, I don't even want to say impatience, because it'd be really hard to be impatient in a situation like this. But had they just stepped back and allowed detectives to do their job, maybe there would not be, I don't want to say three innocents because Frank was really just a scumbag. Again, you don't feel bad for him, but the two brothers who were locked up for this, it's impossible to feel bad. So with the immense pressure that the Irelands put on the detectives and the jury system, the prosecution team, you have to wonder if that had an effect on putting two innocent people away in prison. So Sean spent 1 year in prison, and he was released after that thanks to the plea agreement that we talked about. Now, this case itself, it's pretty relevant because you fast forward all the way to 2023, 2 years ago. Albert was released from prison after 25 years in prison for wrongful conviction of Dana Ireland's murder. Albert and his family are receiving legal assistance for compensation at this time, 4 times spent locked away for a crime he never committed. Now, this kind of goes back to my second question. Do you feel as though there are certain wrongs in life that cannot be righted, no matter what? So I'll tell you about this, and you kind of, in your head, you tell me if you think that, oh yeah, that'll fix it. Now, at this time, there is a system in place in Hawaii that compensates $50,000 per year, every year you were in prison wrongfully. So $50,000, he was locked away in prison for 25 years. If this is approved, which I would have to imagine it would be, that would give him a grand total of $1.25 million. Now, listening to this initially, for the common man, me and you, $1.25 million is not something to sneeze at. Maybe you're thinking, I would never see that in my whole lifetime. But I also feel like 25 years of your life locked away, no freedom. I guess for that second question, for me personally, I don't know if there is a compensation that could make up for all that time lost. Even if you said $1 million a year for 25 years, or even if you said $10 million a year for 25 years, that'd be really tough. But I kind of think that the fact that it's just $50K a year, I almost feel like that's laughable in a way. I would have thought before reading this, I would have thought that the compensation would have been far bigger. But nonetheless, Sean and Albert are both free now. Now, regardless how you feel, maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, but nonetheless, Sean and Albert are both free men in today's world. So there is a positive to that side of the story. And so as tragic as the story has been for the brothers, they are out and free. All that's fine and dandy. Now, you might be wondering, whatever happened to Frank Pauline? This was the third perpetrator arrested for Dana's murder. Frank was the one who put this whole entire thing in motion. He came forward, admitted to hitting Dana with a tire iron. He said he was with both brothers during the murder. They all took part in running her down, sexually assaulting her, killing her. The lies, the testimonies to help get his half-brother a lighter sentence. Well, Frank, he actually became a part of an entirely different murder case while in prison. However, this time, his roles were a little different. Frank actually played part of the victim. He was sentenced to prison, and he was sent to New Mexico to serve the rest of his time. While in New Mexico, later in his sentencing, while he was there, he was hit in the back of the head with a rock by another inmate. And this inmate was already in prison for life, and he said that he killed Frank Pauline for being a snitch. So if you believe in karma, then it's hard to feel like maybe that's not a little karma coming through. And just a little side note, I thought this was kind of laughable when people were trying to get Frank Pauline free. There's people working on Albert getting him free, and then there's people trying to get Frank free because he didn't do it either. Well, then he happened to get murdered right as all this was kind of coming across. Well, we go back to John Gonsalves. You could say that he was really the one that started all of this. Well, he actually spoke out about the justice side of things and said that he wasn't murdered for being a snitch, that he was claiming that the prison system put a hit out on him to prevent him from getting out. And I just thought it was funny that you wanted this guy to take the fall to get you a lighter sentence. That's exactly what he does. And then when he's murdered inside, now you're the one that's like standing up and like speaking out about it. So unfortunately, John Gonsalves is still out and about. I feel like he should have had some sort of responsibility in all of this. But nonetheless, the brothers are free. Frank Pauline was murdered in prison. And the story is not quite over. You think it's over, it's not over yet. If these three men didn't kill Dana, they're cleared of the charges, well, then who did? Well, the answer to this question is just another tragedy on top of everything else we've discussed. Now, police had interest in local fishermen who lived his life just miles from where Dana was found back in 1991. This man's name was Albert Loro Jr. Police interviewed him and took a swab of his DNA. And this, honestly, was just a few months back from today's date. This was in 2024. So they interview the guy. They take his DNA. They didn't necessarily have anything to hold him on, so the police allowed him to leave after interviewing and swabbing him. Now, DNA being much more detailed today than back during the initial trials, the DNA of Albert Loro Jr. came back as an exact match to the DNA from Dana's sheet, as well as the bite marks. While this sounds like a victory, police finally identifying the real killer 33 years later. Well, not quite a victory. After the police allowed him to leave the station, Albert Loro returned home and, assumingly knowing that he would be at some point recognized as the killer, he killed himself. Albert ran Dana off the road Christmas Eve 1991, raped and murdered her. There were 3 innocent suspects who were charged and spent time in prison while he continued to live his life as a free man throughout the next 33 years. And just as he was about to be finally caught to serve justice, he killed himself. Finally, we have one last tragedy in all of this. It's a lot of negatives, but we got one more. There's one last tragedy in all of this. So the innocents have been released. Frank Pauline, who started this whole thing, was murdered in prison. The person who actually killed Dana took his own life to avoid justice. And we have one last kick in the gut before we wrap this story up. From innocence being locked away to the true guilty person never serving time. Well, Dana's parents, both John and Louise, had passed away prior to the uncovering of the release of Albert or the finding of Dana's parents, both John and Louise, had passed away prior to the uncovering of the release of the brothers or the finding of Albert Loro Jr. The parents who didn't care about who they upset or pissed off, the parents who were down to do absolutely anything it took for justice to be served for their daughter, no matter the cost, no matter who disliked them, well, they passed away before ever finding out exactly who was responsible for taking their daughter away. So as we conclude our case this week in the state of Hawaii, discussing the pursuit of justice with the Ireland family, what they went through to make sure her killers served the price, I once again want to just bring back my original question around the horn for myself, for the listeners back home. Is there a limit for how hard you can push for justice of a loved one? Or is it possible to push too hard for justice? I mean, I still have to continue to lean towards just putting myself in the position. Selfishly, unselfishly, I have to still say no. There's no limit to what I would do for a loved one of mine. That being said, I can also say that 3 people being locked away for a crime they didn't commit, I mean, that is something that I would never want. So if that is the outcome of pushing for it, then maybe you can push too hard. Maybe this is one of those questions that does not necessarily have a right or wrong answer. And those are my favorite questions. The ones that you can go back and forth on, and no matter your opinion, you're not right or wrong because there's not a correct answer. Lastly, are there certain wrongs that are simply impossible to make right no matter the compensation? So Frank Pauline, he creates a story to get his brother off. He ends up getting 2 people locked away for quite some time that had nothing to do with it. I feel like that was a wrong. And what was the compensation? Well, karma got him in the end. He was murdered in prison. I'd go ahead and say, yeah, I mean, that's as close to being made right as possible. Now, for the brother who was locked away and hopefully getting $50,000 a year, I would say to that, no. I don't think that there is a right to that wrong. I don't think that there's any compensation that could be made for your freedom. And, I mean, if there is a right to that, it would have to have a lot more zeros. That's the only way. All right, so I guess with that being said, that's pretty much going to wrap us up. If you've stuck around this long, I just want to say thank you. I want to apologize to you for having to bear with me as a solo guy this long. I said that it's a goal of mine to learn something new, and I hope you do the same every episode. One thing I've learned is that doing this by myself without a co-host, pretty hard. Hopefully Sarah's back and okay by next week, and you, the listener, get a little bit more back and forth than just 60 minutes of myself. But that's pretty much it. So, remember to closing points. I always like to have some closing points. I like to take something away from every case. You like to think that every story, everything in this world has something to take from. So here's what I would take from this. When it comes to your loved ones, fight like hell. Do what you can to protect them. Do what you can to make sure that they're done right. That being said, make sure that you're not doing it at the expense of an innocent person's harm. when possible. I would also say if a family member asks you for help, whether it's moving a couch, changing a tire, bringing them food because they're in need, by all means, you should do whatever you can to help your loved ones. That being said, do not take the fall for a murder that you did not commit to get them out of a cocaine charge. I think that should go without being said, but nonetheless, that is going to be one of my closing points for this week's episode. As far as the state of Hawaii, there's not a whole lot to be said. We all know about Hawaii, whether you've been there or not. We get it. It's a top, if it's not your top state, if it's not your top 3 state, it's a top 5 state. And if you don't have it in the top 5, you're either lying or you just hate beautiful weather. So there's not a whole lot to really recap on that. I'm going to go ahead and throw it at our 3 spot since Sarah's not here. I think that that's a fair position to put it in. And we'll lock that in. Okay, let's put a bow and ribbon on this episode. As we begin our departure from the state of Hawaii, in conclusion of episode 26 of 50 States, 50 Murders, we want to continue to thank you, the listener, for tuning in. Each and every week, we will continue covering a new state, as well as a murder case that happened to take place there. If you have not already, please be sure to follow along and subscribe. We are on Spotify. We are on Apple Podcast. We do post on YouTube. Social media-wise, we're on TikTok and Instagram. Be sure to tune in next week for episode 26, where we will be heading to New Jersey. See you then.